Right, we are now live. So welcome to the IICD SZG Hangout. I'm not going to say the whole name.
I'm glad you said it.
I was debating for a while. I was like, do I want to say the whole thing as fast as I can and fumble my words or what? So um, I guess it bears noting we do this live, so if we fuck up, we own up to it, and we're not going to edit it out. So, let me get a link to this posted while we're chatting. I'll post a link to the community so they can start watching us. So we're talking about conspiracy theories today, mostly about, well, I wouldn't say mostly, but we were going to focus somewhat on the 9/11 conspiracy theory in honor of Mike Bowler's recent episode of Skeptics Guide to Conspiracy about 9/11 conspiracy theories. So, why don't you tell me your favorite or most well-remembered 9/11 conspiracy theory? By favorite, that could be like one you laugh at the most or seems most controversial, I guess.
I just dropped out of my back. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yeah.
Okay, I just dropped out. So sorry, you were asking for my favorite 9/11 conspiracy theory?
Yeah, favorite being I'm not sure if that's quite the word or not.
I think the whole thing. It's so complex, so intricate, and at the same time so silly. It's that any government would even consider such a concept to murder its own citizens. It's just so ridiculous. It's so outside the plausible nature of reality, in my opinion. I'm an engineering type person, so I haven't read a whole lot about 9/11 conspiracies, but the parts of it I have paid attention to are the engineering side of it. There was a building 5 or something that was damaged, and I can't remember if it fell down after the fact or if they had to take it down or something. But
I think the general consensus, non-conspiracy theorist, is that it finally just collapsed on its own after some time.
yeah, and just people just can't see how that would have happened. The collateral damage of a building that close to two of those massive buildings coming down. I mean, that's entirely possible. And then there's the whole thermite thing. I've seen these controlled demolitions of buildings, the large buildings. One of them was probably 18 or 20 stories tall.
Mm-hmm.
And while there's definitely an engineering science behind it, it's not as perfect. It's not as clear cut as a lot of people would like to believe. And I just don't see something being executed that well. I hate to use that term to describe the event, but that perfectly for the conspirators. I just don't see it.
Yeah, I hear that. I would say the idea of a government, a government agency or some members of a government agency using the death of its citizens, even causing that, isn't, again, like I said earlier, it's not completely outside the realm of possibility. It's pretty unlikely. For me, the thing is, the simple answer to that is think of how extremely complex that operation would have been. How many people had to be involved, how many people had to not talk. And it's my general impression that keeping that many people quiet about something so massive and so controversial is just not, I'm not going to say it's not possible, but it's just so unlikely. I don't know much of anything about building demolition. I know that, reasonably speaking, there's a lot of talk about whether or not the building could collapse on its own, what speed it would fall, at what speed it would fall, et cetera, et cetera. And I think to myself, that's really our first, I say we on the kind of on a global scale, that's the first real example we have of that kind of attack / disaster. I don't know of any kind of test where buildings that enormous were intentionally demolished and data collected about that. So it's a lot of speculation. Even educated speculation is still kind of that. Without some kind of real world data, you have ideas of what it should or shouldn't do, and so if you design a building that's supposed to withstand some certain kind of impact, or it's supposed to withstand some kind of stresses, well, that's under perfect conditions, sure, but shit happens. In this case, big shit happened. Something that I don't think anyone had foreseen. I don't think before then, people probably weren't. I imagine engineers weren't saying, well, what if some crazy asshole decides to run a jetliner into this building? We should probably plan for that as well. I imagine now that's probably in the guidelines these days.
Yeah, I wonder if the replacement tower, if that hasn't been considered for that. You've got a couple of different factors there. You run an airplane into a building, and it's such a ridiculous concept. I think you're right. No one would ever think to prepare for that, except maybe in an accidental case. But you run an airplane into a building, you've got some major destruction that's happening from the impact. Structural members and beams are being destroyed and deflected and deformed as that impact happens. And that's bad enough. I think done the right way, that could take a building down. But once you add in the fire from the fuel and the other combustible materials in the building and the airplane, and the weakening impact or weakening effect that had on the structural members that remained, that a building collapsed is, likely, and I think an eventuality in a lot of cases. I've got, I saw a steel beam, about maybe 35 or 40 centimeters, an I-beam, so that would be for the Americans about 14 or 16-inch I-beam. And it was in a school. The school burned. This was not a large building, a single-story building. And the heat was so intense in that small building that this 14-inch I-beam deflected. So it looked, if you looked at it side on, it looked like this, like a Play-Doh, a piece of Play-Doh that was bent that easily. And so I absolutely do agree that structural beams and members that are subject to heat like that and impact can be destroyed very, very easily and very quickly.
And along that line, there's a lot of talk where people will say jet fuel doesn't burn at whatever temperature it is. It's not just, after the fire had started, it's not just jet fuel burning at that point. Every material in that area was a material that's burning now. And to the best of my knowledge, a fire doesn't just take its, when you give a material's highest burning point and go, and it's not just capped at that. There's a lot of factors involved. And that's another thing, is a very complex equation there of the stresses from the impact, the stresses from the deformation of the building structure after the impact, like you said, and then the heat applied to it. Mike had talked about a lot of questions of like where one person or another was during the whole thing, and I talked about this with him last week. Something that someone said, why was whoever was having a meeting that day at the World Trade Center, and why was that meeting canceled? I said, I work in a small corporate environment. What even here is like, that's just day-to-day business.
Meetings are
you got
canceled.
A meeting at 11, at 10:30, hey, this meeting's canceled. It's like, okay, or it got pushed back. So
happens all the time, and I mean, it's if they're using that to support a conspiracy to take down the World Trade Center buildings, that's about as weak as it gets right there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so jet fuel is largely kerosene, and if you were to take a small amount of kerosene and burn it, I'm sure you can get a certain burn temperature, but once you subject that fuel to different conditions, different air mixtures, different if you enclose it in a small volume sort of thing. Again, I'm not a fair type guy, but I'm guessing that the temperature that kerosene burns at will change based on those conditions. And you're right. I mean, the combustible materials in an office building, built in the 70s no less, some of those materials burn very, very hot. pressed wood products, carpeting products, wall coverings, you know, a lot of really high temperature combustibles there.
Mm-hmm.
Plastics.
I almost hate to. I was just thinking, I had a little train of thought where I was thinking, you know, some people say that the fire couldn't have burned hot enough to melt the steel, but it didn't have to necessarily.
That's right.
It only needed to burn hot enough to weaken enough of it.
That's
And
right.
I was thinking, you know, part of me hates to talk about it without real scientific knowledge, real solid knowledge on the topic of how hot the fire has to burn to melt particular types of steel beams or whatnot. So, you know, this is a bit anecdotal as well. I think, though, I try to take a common sense approach. And that's something I can say, you know, fairly certainly, is that you don't have to melt the steel entirely, you just have to weaken it. You know, all those things factor in together to greatly weaken the structure of those buildings.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know when we build some smaller buildings, the tendency is actually to go towards wooden beams where possible. I'm talking real small buildings, because although they're combustible, they will retain a considerable amount of strength, even if a certain volume of the beam is destroyed by fire. And it doesn't take a lot of energy, a lot of heat, to weaken steel to the point where it'll fail. The reason steel, of course, is used in those real large buildings is that it has a very excellent ability to support its own weight and the weight of all the other building materials. Wood would not work in those cases.
I remember, what's the name of that movie? I think it's Loose Change. It's the big conspiracy theory movie, like one of the earlier ones. I think that's what it was called. Where I was watching that, and they talked to a few people who talked about explosions they heard underground or on ground level. And two things came to mind about that. Was one, if that building had its structural integrity so compromised, hearing noises that could resemble explosions isn't out of the question. And also that in the middle of a tragedy, or even just some very hectic or frantic event, eyewitness testimony is notorious for being terrible because people have a very subjective experience and they tend to fill in gaps or unintentionally imagine things that, or just incorrectly recall things that happened. And so watching that movie, I remember thinking to myself, well, you know, I guess there's an old saying that the plural of anecdote is not data. That's kind of what I thought there. It's like, yes, these people, certainly there's some credibility in that they were there and they experienced something terrible. That in and of itself doesn't mean that what you're hearing is an objective recount, or sorry, an objective recollection of the events that happened.
Yeah, that's an important point to make. You know, the plural of anecdotes isn't data. And there's a couple of different cases here. You know, if you get 1,000 people independent of each other having, or at least reporting, the same subjective experience, well, maybe that's something to look at. But we got to be careful about people getting into an after-the-fact or retroactive groupthink mode where, you know, they had an experience and maybe haven't assigned value to that experience or a certain subjective nature to that experience, and then reading something online or talking to other people and having that experience molded in a different direction after the fact. And that'd be like I call it retroactive groupthink, I guess. But
and it's subtly reading different accounts and different data subtly changes how you remember things, or can change how you remember things. That's one thing when I talk about events that happen, you know, just talk about experiences. I often bear in mind that what I'm remembering may not be what in fact occurred. Sometimes it doesn't matter depending on what you're talking about. Something as important as a building that was attacked and collapsed, I would think that more important than, you know, the soccer game I watched last week or something.
yeah,
And it's we tend to have we as humans have a tendency, we want to believe what someone else says. And so we hear someone tell this story and we want to believe them, especially if it's someone who comes across as genuinely not trying to fool us. Like, so this person had this experience that to them, that's exactly what they experienced. Their subjectivity says, this is what I saw, this is what I experienced, and we don't want to be like, I don't think you experienced that. Taking that leap from, okay, I hear this guy talk or these people talk, taking the leap from that to, oh, this must be exactly what happened, and let's fill in the gaps here with some big mustache twisting, evil government stuff. I mean, I don't think, by any means, I don't think the American government is altruistic. At the same time, I don't think, I can't see the government having orchestrated that. And also in part because for the goals that it would have accomplished, if you will, they didn't need to do that. They, if you wanted a reason to, if government agencies wanted a reason to invade Iraq, they could have found another reason. They didn't need to do something so terrible in order to do so. Now, of course, that is conjecture as well, but I feel like it's reasonable anyway.
And just to go back to the point you made earlier, John, about trying to keep all these people, all these supposed conspirators quiet, there's just no way. The government, whether it's the American or Canadian or whatever government, they can't keep anything quiet. I mean, things that have hugely detrimental effects to individual politicians and parties and so on. I mean, they can't keep anything quiet. How in hell would it be possible to keep something this big, this complex, and requiring that many people to be involved quiet? In my mind, that's the shot that kills the whole thing right there.
Yeah, it seems very unlikely. I won't say it's impossible. I don't like to say anything is absolutely impossible. I'm with you, though. It's like the probability of being able to keep, I mean, even a really conservative, off the top of my head, estimate, say 50 people involved in doing something like that, to keep that many people, any of them from having an attack of conscience or just loose lips while drunk or something of that nature, just seems extremely unlikely. Oh, there's Mike.
It's about time we had an expert.
We've been waxing intellectual about stuff we know nothing about. I also invited Michael McElroy.
Yeah, I saw that he was asking.
Yeah, I sent him an invite. We'll see if he jumps in with us or not. Yeah, it seems very unlikely. I won't say it's impossible. I don't want to say anything. I hear a delay. I hear me talking. I'm really conservative off the top of my head, estimate, say 50 people.
Is Mike watching the Hangout on YouTube, maybe?
I don't know. There he is. Or just loose lips while drunk or something of that nature. Just extremely unlikely. There's Mike.
About time we had an expert.
We've been waxing intellectual about stuff we know nothing about. I also invited Michael McElroy.
Yeah, I saw that he was asking. Yeah, I think he's listening on YouTube or something.
You may not know that he's joined us.
I'm still trying to get set up here.
Oh, I got you. We can hear ourselves talking quite a bit after what we say. That's interesting.
Yeah, it doesn't sound nearly as intelligent after the fact as it did when I was saying it.
I felt every bit as ignorant hearing myself say it after I had said it. I feel consistent in that.
I'll never go back and watch this on YouTube.
Oh, no. If someone says, let's watch it together, I'll be like, the fuck no.
Yeah.
Here's the link. I'm out.
Yeah.
Don't call me when it's over. So, Mike, welcome. We were, I guess you know what we were talking about, so feel free to jump in and throw any perspective at us if you'd like.
I'm just waking up. I just took a nap and I woke up about a couple minutes ago, so I'm kind of trying to figure out what's happening.
So what happened was you were slipped sedatives by a secret agent to keep you from talking about what you know about the conspiracy.
Probably.
All I know is I'm looking at the bottom part of the screen here. I'm seeing an American on each side of me, and I think that's conspiracy right there. I don't know how you guys had this up or were able to keep it quiet this long, but
We're very good at what we do, sir.
if you can take down the World Trade Centers, you're good at it.
Oh. Shoot.
Oh, that's a
Oh.
good link. Yeah, so Lauren sent me a link in chat, which I don't think is viewable to our audience, so I will post it to the comment section of the video after this is all over. It's a salon.com article about why people believe in conspiracy theories. I think I've read this before, but I'm going to read it again after this to make sure.
This references a study done by an Australian, I think a psychologist, perhaps a psychiatrist, yeah, probably a psychologist. And there are actually quite a few articles written based on that study done by the Australian. Haven't been able to find the actual article yet, the base article, but there's a lot of commentary and a lot of articles written on that study that this guy did. Apparently what he did, and I'm just going off third-party information here, was polled some people who were posting on conspiracy theory websites or something of the such to try to find out their motivation and the psychology behind conspiracy theories. So, interesting read.
One of the things I talked about earlier about the reliability of eyewitnesses was something I first heard a real discussion about on the Radio Lab podcast, which I don't remember now which episode it would have been. But for everyone listening, if you don't listen to Radio Lab, you're missing out on truly great scientific education. So,
Yeah,
Mike, we started this out with our favorite. Did I ever talk about my favorite conspiracy theory?
No, I don't think you did.
Oh, we started talking out. I'm talking about Lauren's favorite conspiracy theory. I think mine. Mike might be able to help me with the details on this, or maybe you can, Lauren. There was talk of a plane, particular commercial liner that was grounded. So I guess a replacement could be used for one of the attacks. So this plane was grounded and the passengers were offloaded at some airport. That's probably my favorite, and it goes right along with what I said earlier about how would you keep. So either, well, in the original talk I heard was that they offloaded these passengers and gave them some story to keep them from being upset about it. Well, I had 2 points that I made to that. One, how would you keep all those people from talking about it after this disaster happened? And two, if you were a government operatives or agency that was okay with killing thousands of people already, why the fuck wouldn't you just kill a few people on a plane? So, we'll ground this and these guys will be okay, but we're going to run these planes into buildings and kill all these others. Those two things alone didn't add up, but mostly just how would you keep all those people quiet? How could you possibly keep them quiet without killing them? And there was never a single passenger name given for that flight that was grounded and the people offloaded. And I never heard anyone say that they were dispatched of. So,
Yeah. So there's actually 4 major aviation accidents within minutes of each other, and a plane lands to discharge passengers in an unplanned manner, and that's yeah, I'm not convinced at all. Although maybe all the passengers were given the same mind control substance that the conspirators of the whole plan had.
Oh, or the Men in Black memory flasher thing. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
Think about that. They were all slipped LSD in their sodas when they got on the plane. Okay, so that's our favorite 9/11 conspiracy theory. So, Mike, if you have one, hit us up with your favorite. I use the term favorite loosely.
I don't know. Oh, what would be good? Because they're all good. Actually, I think the later, this nanothermite stuff, where they supposedly had rigged the Twin Towers with for demolition. Oh, mainly because it's probably about the most ridiculous, because it's actually, that part seemed to be to try to keep the story going, so they made up this because there was a looked like it. I mean, for a while, you know, or when it came out, there was a fairly, it looked like someone did an analysis of some dust they found in New York and found what they said was this nanothermite. Nice, pretty scientific paper, and I'm like, you know, and they're trying, and they're, you know, and trying to make it sound like, and I've never heard of nanothermite. Even looking it up, it's really seems almost like it's like a conjecture that the military has this stuff, and I want, you know, and I'd like to say that well then the fun part was National Geographic did a demonstration using thermite on a piece of steel, and then it just was this ugly mess. All they did was mess everything up. The steel didn't melt or anything like that, and then they showed it to a bunch of truthers, and then they were all like, "Oh, but you didn't do it right. You had to do it this way." And you know, that was the. I mean, I think that's because the rest, all the other stuff. I mean, it's all, you know, when they talk about remote piloted planes and stuff like that. You know, I find that, you know, a lot of it was all. It sounds like they're trying to play the. Well, they were. It was like well, there was the Operation Northwoods documents, and trying to play the you know, saying, yeah, here, see, we've got a government document saying that this is what they wanted to do, and it matches up to stuff that happened on 9/11. But then when it was, you know, totally, you know, coming up, you know, talking about remote piloted planes and stuff like that. I mean, I don't know much about how airliners and how they would actually work, but how would you get in? I don't think they have the technology, or at least allow that type of technology in an airplane.